My name is Joe Dinardo. I'm a industry-retired toxicologist and formulator who worked on sunscreens and personal care products for about 38 years before I recently retired and started working with Dr. Downs in relationship to ecological issues dealing with coral and the problem that we're dealing with sunscreens. On a mission to educate. So we've had a successful run. We've been on several islands. We went to Maui and presented testimony for sunscreens and the issues of both human health and environmental health issues. We've had a great deal of success with the council people and councilmen over in Maui. We spent a lot of time in Kona and the Big Island as well, and did a lot of education. We've done a couple of town halls, and the last few days we've been in Honolulu and working with different representatives and doing, again, education, just trying to explain some of the things that are out there, what's happening and why these things are health issues and concerns to our environment. Well, the main thing that we did, and this time when we came out here, there have been basically about 150 research papers, or 155 research papers that we went through, both on oxybenzone and octinoxate. And the biggest issues, other than the environmental side of things, is in the human health issue. Oxybenzone and octinoxate seem to have endocrine disruption effects. And if you go back and you look at the data that the World Health Organization has looked at over the last 40 to 50 years, what we're seeing is an increase in endocrine cancers. So you have breast cancer, uterine cancer, thyroid cancer, ovarian cancer, testicular cancer. We're seeing trends with type 2 diabetes, for instance. Back about 20, almost 25, 30 years ago, there were about 157 million people with type 2 diabetes. Today there's over 350 million. And in addition to that, what we're seeing is huge changes in children. So we're seeing an increase in ADHD, we're seeing a huge increase in autism, various other kinds of special need issues that are occurring. And all of these things can be associated and linked back into endocrine disruptions, or endocrine disruptors. And both oxybenzone and octinoxate, that's really what our message is, can get into human bodies. It can actually cross the placenta barrier and get into the fetuses and produce a variety of different adverse reactions and effects. Yeah, there's a lot of general toxicity issues as well. There are a lot of multiple generation studies that have been done, and actually there are basically about, out of the 155 papers we reviewed, there's probably about a good third of them that looked at really all kinds of toxic effects, and not just toxic effects in coral, but in individual cells, in human cells, in bacterial cells, in rodents, in all kinds of sea life as well. So, and in bacteria, in algae. So what we're seeing is that there's not just endocrine disruption issues, but there's also general toxicity issues. And then there's, of course, a lot of these chemicals, especially oxybenzone and octinoxate, actually bioaccumulate in fish. So what's happening is that we're catching fish and we're eating fish, and therefore we're transferring that fish into our own bodies. This oxybenzone is being trapped into the meat of the fish. So we're ingesting that as well. So it's a real problem. It's created a problem so that it really creates this issue that what you do to yourself, you do to the environment, and then what you do to your environment comes back and does back to you. So we're in this really obscure kind of cycle dealing with the toxic issues. So we're putting it on our bodies, it's absorbing into our bodies, it's being excreted from our bodies. We go into the shower, we wash it off our bodies, all of that gets into the water. In the water, it gets into everything from basic algae all the way up the food chain into good sized fish that we all use to eat and nourish ourselves with, and it comes back to us. And oxybenzone is actually quite ubiquitous as well. It's used in lots of different products. And again, we just keep giving more and more exposure to ourselves and more exposure to the environment. And it's just creating a really vicious cycle that's going on. Sunscreens and anti-aging lotions. Okay, so those two products can contain up to 6% oxybenzone or 7.5% octinoxate. So that's really where the majority of these exposures are coming from. Things like color cosmetics and fragrances, it's used for color stabilization, it's used for stabilizing fragrance and odors, it's used in plastics, but it's used at a much lower concentration, usually below 1%. So yeah, basically if we can ban these two materials in sunscreens and anti-aging products, or anything that says SPF on it, we will be able to get a huge amount of this out of our environment. And then again, you know, Dr. Downs has been measuring Octinoxate in various places all around the different islands in Hawaii, and in the last 2 years we've seen either a double to between a 2 and a 3.5% increase in the concentrations of both oxybenzone and octinoxate. So if we can ban these materials, we should be able to go back out and monitor it and see and be able to measure a significant reduction in the concentration. The biggest issue is that we're causing people and allowing people to stay in the sun longer, and the longer you stay in the sun, the higher your risk of creating skin cancer. So sunscreens work by absorbing UV rays, and those molecules accelerate, they move faster, and it's done instantaneously. But the way it gets rid of the excess energy is to dissipate heat, okay, so it releases heat, and that's fine. But what the real problem is in skin damage with sunscreens is that, like an SPF 15 only absorbs 97% of UV, so 3% of UV gets through. An SPF 30 only absorbs 98%, so you still get 2% through. So if you're staying on the beach for 4 hours or 6 hours, you know, that 2 or 3% is a significant amount of effect. And that creates really what's called free radicals. And free radicals can produce these cascades of damage. And that's what really damages the skin. So as the UV gets through the skin, it gets into the skin, we create free radicals, and those free radicals really are what really creates the problem, both in the DNA and cells, and it kills them. It creates a variety of different problems in skin. The whole concept to that is when you look at the absorption curves of these materials. So you know, we have a device called a UV absorber, a UV spectrophotometer, and when you put these different sunscreens in there, you get to see where do they absorb, what is their action spectrum, how long do they absorb, into what side, and to how long in the spectrum. And so when you look at all of these different chemical absorbers, what you do is you see peaks and then valleys. It drops down and then fades out. Something like zinc oxide, which is actually the best, zinc oxide really picks up significantly high in the UVB field and then goes completely across the UV spectrum, and almost about 95%, almost absorbs about 100% of the UV. Titanium dioxide is the next most effective in doing that as well. So again, but you get, not only do you get absorption in the spectrum, which is what people always say, well, these absorb in the spectrum, it's the intensity, how much they absorb into the spectrum. So absorbing 95% is significant, and that's what zinc will do. Good?
I love it. Thank you so much.